The best analysis, criticism, and commentary, in my opinion as a writer and somewhat passionate about the art of telling stories, comes from the people who do it purely for the love of what they are talking about. All across the internet, you can find people discussing the stories they hold dear. As I said before in the introduction, the internet has allowed people an unprecedented ability to discuss their favorite stories or subjects with other equally enthusiastic people. And new technologies have allowed them to present their ideas in new ways, such as in video essays like this, which have themselves become forms of art. Through the mixture of passion, artistry, and accessibility, these communities have developed elements that I believe have made them an alternate academic scene, independent of and without the baggage of traditional academic institutions. Individuals can freely publish their informational content to help others learn, as well as their contributions to ongoing discussions, their interpretations, or their findings, whatever, for their communities to discuss and debate and/or rip to shreds for being dumb. This is especially true of video games, because through the internet the gaming community intellectually engaged with them in this way before anyone else did. It goes beyond discussions of what games and what missions are the coolest, which character is most badass or fun to play, or even just what stories are the most entertaining. The discussion of games go deep into the art of storytelling and game design, but also into politics, games as commentary on real-world issues, history, journalism, and education, philosophy, and on and on. This is part of what makes video games particularly interesting to analyze and study, to me. They are a truly new art form, and they really kicked off during my childhood in the early 2000s, as well as how they have evolved with the internet. Both are revolutionary. The internet and how we communicate, and video games and how stories can be told, helping us see subjects in ways that are totally new. Yes, games have been around since the 1960s. Still, the gap between a game from the 60s to one from the 90s is like comparing a flintlock pistol to a Colt Peacemaker, and comparing a game from the 90s to a recent release is like comparing a Peacemaker to a Predator drone. The artistic eras of gaming, as in periods defined by certain industry and development trends, tend to be tied to console generations, which is a period where the majority of hardware shares similar features and capabilities. Generations are gauged by the life cycles of those consoles, which is the period when a console and its services are supported by its manufacturer and games are developed for it. The arbitrary year ranges and specific technical details aren't all that important other than as references, and they're loosely defined for that matter. The important thing to know is that developers are limited in scope to what can be handled by the predominant hardware in the hands of gamers at a given time. Thus, the capability of that hardware affects predominant styles and trends of that generation, such as the gray and brown gritty palettes of the early 7th generation, affectionately referred to as the piss filter. Many early games released on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 used the piss filter, and this was due to lighting limitations at the time, as well as the grim atmosphere of the 2000s, where the War on Terror, the Great Recession, and other tribulations manifested themselves in the art of the time. As the generation progressed, lighting technology improved and the times changed, games began to become more colorful. Compare BioShock and Grand Theft Auto 4, games released from 2007 and 2008, to BioShock Infinite and Grand Theft Auto 5, both released in 2013. The difference is pretty clear. I think Skyrim is a neat example of a game stuck right in the middle. Ironically, Oblivion, which was released in 2006, is a very colorful game that is notable for having aged pretty poorly. It was intentionally very colorful, almost painterly, because of the high fantasy setting. Skyrim has more muted hues, but it takes place in a cold environment where the color palette makes sense, and includes a nice mix of visual diversity in the game's different regions. Vanilla Skyrim is by no means beautiful by today's standards, but just what can be done with a few mods is a mark of how excellent its art direction is. If you choose to embark on the perilous journey that is heavily modding Skyrim, you can make it downright visually stunning, or you'll break it, which is the most likely outcome. Oblivion Remastered uses a dual engine system, where the original engine handles all the gameplay, while the graphics utilize Unreal Engine 5 to vastly overhaul the game's visuals. And while players, myself included, have been overjoyed at seeing the game in such high fidelity, they have also been lamenting the loss of that highly saturated color palette of the 2006 original, as the remaster uses more realistic coloration. And while the visuals are undeniably much better, some of what makes Oblivion special has been lost in the eyes of many players. The point of this little tangent is that the advancement of games in the past 30-some years has brought them to a point where they have started to show artistic or stylistic periods, and that's pretty cool. A recent gameplay trend has been the huge boom in the Souls-like genre, epitomized by Elden Ring. As a result of the pushback against the trend of simplifying and paring back the difficulty of games for the sake of wider accessibility that began in the 8th generation, when gaming as a hobby fully entered the mainstream and target demographics were broadened by companies. Microsoft marketed the Xbox One as a full entertainment system, hence the name One as in universal, resulting in dissatisfaction from hardcore gamers and general disinterest from non-gaming consumers who would always see it as a gaming machine. Once again, this development ran parallel to the internet, and the two are intertwined. Game stores and magazines are outmoded by digital marketplaces directly on the consoles and gaming websites. It's its own separate issue, but recently the business of journalism as a whole has become reliant on clickbait and ragebait, and this is especially true of media journalism, particularly that brand of commentary and/or opinion piece journalism, of which games journalism arguably has the worst of, leading many hardcore gamers to be outright hostile towards games journalists. If I, at any point, sound biased, it's because I am. In academia, you're supposed to be unbiased, but in my experience, there's no such thing as being unbiased. There's only transparency and letting people decide if you're trustworthy for themselves. People who claim to be unbiased, like academics and journalists, and never show any opinion are doubly suspicious to me, because I believe they might lull you into a false sense of confidence that you're getting the facts, only to then lie by omission or some other twist of the truth. To be transparent, I'll let you know my biases, therefore you can judge for yourself if I'm being straight. The fundamental flaw of professional criticism is that critics are often asked to critique media they aren't the target audience of, and they do not enjoy, which is one of the reasons behind the critic and audience score disparity on sites like Rotten Tomatoes. Games journalism uniquely requires journalists to play games and be good at them if they're going to get the whole experience, which only makes that problem even worse in gaming critique. Moreover, because games are so loaded with content, many companies send out early review copies and invite journalists to events, as well as give them other scoops from the company, like interviews and so on, because every article is free marketing for the game. It's a symbiotic relationship, a scoop for publicity. But if a review is negative, the relationship becomes parasitic to the company, so they would cut the journalist off, and then the journalist will lose their source of easy scoops. Effectively, these professional critics are unable to write negative reviews, undermining the integrity of any review given by a writer for a major outlet who's beholden to a publisher. Beyond that, there's the pervasive culture war being fought through opinion pieces heavily reliant on pandering to one side and baiting the other for clicks. The infamous #GamerGate movement is a prime example of that. The whole sordid affair began when programmer Aaron Joni publicly spoke out about being abused by his former partner, developer Zoe Quinn, effectively challenging her credibility in their leftist activist gaming community. Quinn was reasonably well known online, and the drama quickly spread, including a rumor Quinn exchanged sexual favors with a Kotaku journalist for positive publicity of her interactive fiction game Depression Quest, made to teach the player about how it is to live with depression. Now, I can't attest to the veracity of this claim. However, Joni said this on his WordPress, which I think is relevant to larger issues. Nepotism is both the charm and the bane of the indie dev scene. At its best, it's a friend asking a friend to work on a game with them in their mom's basement, or a husband and wife collaborating on a project. At its worst, it's a gigantic, clique-driven high school, but with old people and money on the line. This is incredibly toxic. I've had people contact me after reading the blog who want to speak out about things Zoe has done to them or their friends, professionally or personally, or both. She mixes the two a lot, who are too afraid to go public for fear of repercussions from the community on which they rely. The indie dev scene runs on nepotism. Games journalism doesn't only participate in and exploit the nepotism, but actively exacerbates it. Social justice adapts to the nepotism instead of addressing it. A very vocal minority of fans spend an inordinate amount of energy harassing devs with sexist or racist comments, and this is somehow all business as usual. Zoe Quinn, in the meantime, is, in the most fucked up way possible, propelled to prominence through her exposure by this sexist harassment which very, very much exists, and finesses her way through nepotistic ranks until she has enough power to weaponize the social justice crowd against a group of people who are literally just trying to get women into games. Those people were the Fine Young Capitalists, a charity competition to help women gain industry experience. Disagreements over the nature of the project led Quinn and Maya Kramer to lash out at the Fine Young Capitalists on Twitter, ultimately leading to TFYC's website crashing in what was essentially an accidental DDoS attack.
We know Maya works PR for many indie devs, including Zoe Quinn. We know Maya works PR for Silverstring Media, a group that's backed by Anita Sarkeesian.
This was also at the time when feminist activist Anita Sarkeesian was gaining notoriety in the gaming community for her scathing and arguably dubious criticism of depictions of women in gaming. The major controversy surrounding her was that she claimed to be an avid gamer when she showed little understanding of the subculture in their views, including those of female gamers. As in, gamers believed she was hijacking their community as a springboard for her own political agenda. In many ways, feminists are right to criticize games for their portrayal of women. There's a lot that is tasteless, like the stupid and ridiculous bikini worn by Quiet, a sniper, in Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain, which is set in Africa and Afghanistan, and outright disgusting like the sex scenes in Ride to Hell Retribution, although just about everything in that game is repellent, so... In his now classic review of Ride to Hell, Angry Joe tore into its portrayal of women.
That is disgusting, awkward, tone-deaf, shameful, wrong, juvenile, dirty, creepy, insulting, and it's just plain fucking stupid!
So, despite having ample material to work with, I would claim Anita Sarkeesian deliberately antagonized gamers by making purposefully out-of-touch criticism to rile people up so she could point her finger and say she was being attacked by sexists, to gain attention, sympathy, and justification that would propel her career.
She has an assortment of special moves called torture attacks, which involve devices meant to suggest BDSM and look like something you might expect to see in an exaggerated stereotype of a sex dungeon.
To explain the appeal of Bayonetta, we need to talk about Susan Sontag's 1964 essay, Notes on Camp. She explains that the essence of camp is its love of the unnatural, of artifice and exaggeration.
But these sexualized moves have nothing to do with sex. They just obliterate her enemies.
Nothing about the game is low-key or toned down. It's climax after climax with insane sequences and events. So it's fitting for Bayo's design and personality to match.
And a number of her attacks literally leave her naked, because you see she's attacking the enemies with her hair, and her hair is also her clothing, so when she's using her hair to attack her enemies, it can't be covering her body, and...
From the different hairstyles and colour palettes, the experimental journey of her style is a very intriguing one to see, with some of the most visually stunning concept art I've seen.
In these ways, the game deliberately links Bayonetta's sexuality to power, selling a version of sexual objectification that we're all supposed to feel good about and find empowering. Every aspect of Bayonetta's existence, from the way the camera is magnetically drawn to her sexualized body parts.
The artbook notes that Bayonetta's poses were sometimes modelled after fashion magazines. Bayo walks around like a model on a catwalk, strutting down the runway and exuding confidence with every step.
To the pole dance reward for completing the game.
Her movements are very striking, and are attributed to multiple performers for flips, rolls, and dancing. It was specifically the dancer Maiko, whose elegance and bewitching moveset added a unique flair to Bayonetta. It was so good that they included a dance video at the end of the game.
Is expertly designed to be sexually affirming and satisfying for a presumed straight male audience. If it seems like I'm frequently repeating the fact that the player is presumed to be a straight male, that's because it's vital to remember. This presumption influences and shapes so many creative decisions that are made in the development of many games.
The fashion world clearly has an influence on Bayonetta, with her exuberant presence and extravagant taste. Kamiya wanted Mari Shimazaki to work as the character designer for Bayonetta, to offer a feminine perspective into her design and fashion.
Whatever the cause, the resultant online firestorm resulted in both women being vitriolically harassed for their perceived sins, real or made up. Regardless of what either woman did or did not do wrong, much of that harassment was reprehensible, unjustifiable, and rooted in sexism rather than anything approaching intelligent arguments.
Just the mere mention of this girl's name will blow up your comments section with some of the most disgusting hate and ignorance I have ever seen, and it depresses and angers me that some of my own fans engage in it and post it. If you can't take a dissenting opinion or someone that disagrees with you, then why the hell are you even subscribed to any review or editorial channel at all?
Not all of the backlash was harassment, mind you, but a lot of it was, and that is what got the most attention from the media. To quote journalist Kathy Young, for many politically engaged culture journalists, the attacks on Quinn and Sarkeesian were a perfect storm of gamer misogyny. There was a flood of articles skewering gamer culture as a toxic cesspit of entitled, socially inept, woman-hating maleness and proclaiming the demise of gamers as an identity. This was then met with immense backlash from the wider gaming community, and there was only an increase in vitriol towards journalists, critics, and activists who were seen as attacking, disrespecting, and/or attempting to usurp the gaming subculture. The two primary issues GamerGate claimed to be concerned with was ethics in gaming journalism and the unwelcome encroachment of social justice as defined by non-gamers. Most saw them as one and the same, as the cronyism in the gaming press was seen correctly as overlapping with progressive groupthink. And that's still kind of the case today. According to developer Dan Vavra, the lead on Kingdom Come Deliverance, it's all about political correctness. The corruption and ethics are just the result of it. I believe in freedom of speech, even when I hear things I despise. What we saw over the last couple of years is a lot of articles in gaming media that were exaggerating some problems to absurd proportions and creating an atmosphere of hostility against people who disagree with them. We only heard one side of the story all the time for some reason. And when he talks about censorship, he knows what he's talking about, as he grew up under communism in Czechoslovakia. So I have first-hand experience with censorship and other advantages of true socialism, like going to prison for your opinion or shitty propaganda on TV, in literature, and even music. So I really don't think that political correctness, which is just a fancy word for censorship, can solve anything. It never did. The mainstream media portrayed GamerGate as an assault on women in the gaming industry, development, and journalism, and on feminism. Here's an excerpt from one such article, Letter to a Young Male Gamer by Slate. But I am assuming that you, young gamer, are one of the reasonable ones who feel they can't be heard above this colossal noise. I imagine you're frustrated that you're getting lumped in with abusive trolls, teenage ragers, men's rights activists, pickup artists, Elliot Rodger, and worse. But I do have a request for you. Stop publicly criticizing Quinn. Go after the men. Criticize the games themselves. But leave the women alone, even if you think they merit criticism. I know it's unfair for me to ask this of you, young gamer. A fair number of people, not you, are doing a lot worse than criticizing. Those adolescents, or arrested adolescents, are trolling Quinn, but they're not going to listen to reason. Some eventually might after they graduate from high school, and you might. I realize that you don't have a problem with women per se. Think of Kim Swift, the awesome game designer who was project lead for the legendary Portal. Or think of Halo engine programmer Corinne Yu. You realize, I know, that your life would be better with more women like them in gaming. Swift herself has written about how rough women have it in the industry, so keep in mind that targeting Quinn will drive away the next Kim Swift. That's not a trade you want to make. But for the most part, GamerGaters, quite a few of whom were girls.
This video comes from the brain of Camera Lady. In case it's not obvious by now, Cam has a disability that makes it very hard for her to speak properly in a public sphere. It seems like I'm becoming the mouth of Camera Lady. I don't mind though. Just know that this video is entirely the product of her own efforts.
Took issue with a particular brand of feminism and identity politics that they found polarizing and censorious, like that of Anita Sarkeesian. V, 4chan's gaming board, is widely seen as a hostile place for women, gay people, and basically anyone who isn't part of the V gaming culture. 4chan in general is widely viewed as a nasty sort of place for anyone not straight and male. So it was strange when V rallied behind the fine young capitalists, raising $17,000 for the game jam, partly in order to spite Quinn, and partly in order to mess with everyone's preconceptions of the forum. TFYC even agreed to use a V-designed female mascot for the winning game, the now infamous Vivian James, an every girl of sorts, and maybe not what you'd expect from 4chan. Or maybe she is. Intending to be a play on video games, she's dressed in green and purple, denoting a popular 4chan sexual assault piccolo dick meme, and dons either a clover in her hair for 4chan or the infinite loop for 8chan. So we have the fine young capitalists, a self-described radical feminist group aligned with 4chan. Strange bedfellows indeed, though my conversations with the organizers of the fine young capitalists reveal deep dividing lines between many mainstream feminists and the concepts of this particular group. Anita Sarkeesian's name came up, and Dan Vavra dismissed her as totalitarian, said her research was poor, and that she was making demands. When the game developer Zoe Quinn's name came up, recall she's the developer whose ex-boyfriend wrote a post shredding her reputation that somehow kicked a lot of this GamerGate stuff off. And yes, Quinn briefly dated one of our reporters. He snarked about how her game Depression Quest was just a web page and got attention because it was about depression. I sort of get his issues with Sarkeesian, though I feel her influence is exaggerated. Quinn seems like a weird fixation, a vestige of Twitter fuming that seemed less relevant when said out loud. The pattern, though, was that people might be paying attention to them and their ideas. The criminal-level harassment and threats, the bigotry, and the ideological intolerance GamerGate is said to have displayed, and in many cases did indeed, can be found to have come from both sides of the debate. One side called the other SJWs, and they called them misogynerds. But here, at least, we have a glimpse at just how much each side of the equation loathes the other, how each side has labeled the other in order to dehumanize them. And that's true of the majority of polarized internet debates and a recurring theme of the modern age. None of these movements are formally organized. There's no vetting or true leadership, and all membership requires is flying the banner or slogan of a cause. The nature of the internet and anonymity both foster and enable people to be radical and cruel without repercussions, and traps them in echo chambers that only reinforce prejudices and further radicalize beliefs. It's simply the unfortunate reality of the digital age, and isn't unique to any particular ideology. There will be reasonable people, those who take things too far, and those who just want an excuse to hurt people while maintaining their sense of moral superiority. Now, most say that GamerGate began when Zoe Quinn was slandered by her often unnamed ex, or when she was accused of exchanging sex for publicity for her game, as in it was a libelous accusation that she slept her way to the top because she's a woman in gaming, despite that claim never being a part of Aaron Joni's original accusations against her. Remember, Zoe Quinn's name came up? Recall she's the developer whose ex-boyfriend wrote a post shredding her reputation? In 2019, Zoe Quinn claimed developer Alec Holowaka sexually assaulted her back in 2012 via Twitter and without evidence, resulting in him losing his job, being socially ostracized, and ultimately committing suicide. Nevertheless, Zoe Quinn remains active in her community. The legacy of GamerGate has left the gaming community just as, if not more, polarized than when GamerGate was at its peak. For many, it is just one large stain on the credibility of mainstream gaming journalism, leading to people seeking alternative outlets. Whether any of these theories about corruption and nepotism hold water is an open question, and one that, in my mind, is secondary to one very big fact. Readers have grown deeply distrustful of the gaming press. This is not really a story about Zoe Quinn, and it's not really a story about corruption either. It's about mistrust, and the way both sides are feeding into that mistrust. Trust is the casualty here. We have deep mistrust between consumers and the video game industry thanks to years of bad DRM and other poor business practices. That mistrust is now being cast on the press that's supposed to be covering the industry to protect the consumer. Consumers, gamers, have increasingly viewed the press as in bed with the industry rather than working for consumers. This is enforced by stories of chummy developers and journalists, lavish AAA publisher-thrown parties, high-scoring games that aren't particularly good, and so forth. I argue that given the shoddy track record of the legacy media in general, you should approach any critic or journalist with a critical eye yourself. While independents have an equal capacity to be as bad because they are independent, they have a greater capacity to be good, as they are also at liberty to speak more plainly and aren't beholden to any company oversight or censorship, meaning they can be more honest. And I suspect that many people think the same way I do. CoffeeZilla has made a name for himself as a journalist specializing in covering scam artists. He released a 3-part series documenting the unregulated gambling scene born out of Counter-Strike Global Offensive's weapon skin economy, its relationship with esports, and the gaming company Valve. To oversimplify, because of CSGO's enormous popularity and the rarity of certain weapon skins, skins have become desirable commodities that can be worth real money, well into the thousands of dollars even.
Oh! Kniv! Oh my fucking god! Så klart! Så klart! Kan jag mitt fan! Kan jag mitt fan! Oh my god! Jag får den! Jag fick den! Ja! Oh my god! What the fuck? Jag tjänar 6,000 precis!
Third-party online casinos allow players to use them as chips. And because the casinos themselves don't use real money, they can avoid regulations such as age verification, therefore enabling underage players to get hooked on gambling. The Angry Joe Show is a long-running YouTube channel reviewing games and covering the industry, Angry Joe taking the approach of a consumer advisor and advocate, and a gamer's gamer. The Angry Joe Show is successful enough for Joe to make it his career and to earn the attention of various companies who have either responded to his criticism or blacklisted him. Like most YouTubers, he makes his money primarily through sponsorships and audience support through services like Patreon and the YouTube Join feature, which give viewers the option to pay a monthly subscription to the creator for access to exclusive content, with various tiers and corresponding perks set by the creator. As an independent creator, Joe is at a greater risk of copyright strikes and/or takedowns on his videos, and therefore the loss of ad revenue, meaning direct support from his audience is his lifeline.
To be clear, we would never take a bribe of any size. This show is funded by $5 a month on Patreon. That's where the real money is.
This is why many creators use both Patreon and YouTube Join, so they have options beyond the tumultuous YouTube ecosystem, which is often criticized as being unhelpful to creators and hostile at worst.
Where you put up on YouTube a review, a critical review of one of the latest episodes, and then HBO took it down, is that right?
That is right, yeah. They gave it a copyright claim. Not a copyright strike against my channel, which has been reported by some people, but no, it wasn't as severe as that. But they did block it worldwide for pretty shady reasons.
Angry Joe got its start by making furious rants about bad games and, over time, developed a formula and his persona as Angry Joe, incorporating sketch comedy into his angry reviews, as well as creating other series on his channel that cover different elements of the entertainment industry, like tabletop games, film, and TV. Through his weekly AGS news uploads, he and his fellow presenters, Other Joe and Alex, give weekly updates and commentary on aggregated news stories. He's railed against exorbitant and invasive microtransactions, gambling mechanics like loot boxes, harmful industry practices and trends like crunch and the post-COVID mass layoffs, and consumer hostile practices like the live service trend. Currently, he's been covering President Trump's tariffs and how they're impacting board game creators especially.
They're at 125 on us. We are at 145 on them, and that is not paused right now.
Yeah. So industries that I care about, board games and miniatures games and stuff like that, they're still kind of fucked.
Businesses like relating to video games and technology, the reason it's important, but the reason that it's on the news show is like even companies like Apple shipped 600 tons of iPhones because they thought there were going to be massive tariffs, only for like the tariffs to be paused, and then things shift, and then then there's a policy where it's like, oh, we're going to have all these exemptions on certain products, and we're like, yeah, that's how it's supposed to be because blanket tariffs are for stupid people, and so then he's like, no, we're going to put those exemptions in a bucket, and we'll talk about that bucket later. And so no one has any idea what's happening, including Sony, including Nintendo, which is why up until now, we still do not know what the price for the Nintendo Switch 2 is going to be. We don't know what the PS5 price in the United States is going to be. There's all sorts of things up in the air, and it's really important as far as gaming is concerned, and it is terrifying.
A long-running crusade of Joe's has been for the United States to adopt more consumer protection laws for gamers, specifically banning loot boxes for violating gambling regulations, which many countries in Europe have begun doing. In one recent installment, as of January 2025, AJS News covered a PC Gamer article about Genshin Impact. A company filed by the U.S. Department of Justice alleged the company behind Genshin Impact violated the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, deceived players about the odds and costs of winning prizes and loot boxes, and uses a challenging and confusing purchasing system that misleads consumers about the amount of money that players spend on loot boxes on an ongoing basis, and the amount of money that players would likely need to spend to obtain certain prizes.
Now, you don't give a shit about Genshin Impact, but this sounds a shitload like Madden.
The Madden NFL series and similar sports games made by EA Sports are notorious for over-monetizing their games because Electronic Arts has an exclusive license with the NFL, NHL, and so on, and the massive captive audience of sports fans, many of which don't realize how predatory EA is relative to other companies because those are the only games they play. They also release a new game every year while iterating on or improving them about as much as Porsche does with the 911. They cite how so many games that use loot boxes, like Madden and Fortnite, only allow players to buy them with in-game currency, which can be earned through gameplay or be purchased in bulk with real money. An example of the deceptive tactics used to obfuscate the price of marketplace items and loot boxes. Digital currency packs often don't equate to the exact amount required to buy loot boxes or marketplace items, meaning players have to buy a larger, more expensive pack or multiple smaller packs to afford an item, extracting more money than is actually necessary. Loot boxes themselves often use the same shiny, exciting, dopamine-releasing presentation as casino machines, and companies like Valve have been known to consult psychologists on how to make their user interfaces more appealing and presumably addictive. Alex cites two takeaway bullet points from the PC Gamer article, that all loot boxes available for purchase with virtual currency will also be made available for direct purchase using real money, and loot box odds and exchange rates for multi-tiered virtual currency will be adequately disclosed and not misrepresented.
Hey, you want to buy this ultra panty pack? This panty pack costs, like 22 Bazinga coins or 99 cents, and people will be able to see what the crossover is. So I don't necessarily care because it's Genshin Impact, but this is actually pretty big for the video game industry in general, and people need to be nervous because there are a lot of companies doing very, very similar things. EA is being one of them. They make all of their money in MUT mode and in
football.
What's the FIFA or not? Definitely not.
It's not FIFA anymore.
Not FIFA, but that mode.
EA Sport FC Sports.
FC.
Yeah, something like that.
EA Sports FC.
Yeah,
and so they do all of these things, and I think that it would not be unrealistic for us to be talking about that in the future. And the fines could be great, like massive, because they make $1 billion a year almost in microtransactions.
AJS News and the similar GameRanks Friday news show, among countless others, are aggregate sources. They don't do any of the investigative journalism, nor do many even attempt to be unbiased. But what they do is sift through the various stories across multiple outlets and determine what is of most interest to their viewers, and they can put more time into researching these stories and keeping up with the context than your average gamer can, in order to inform and commentate for their target audience. For audiences with limited free time to pay attention to the stuff, it's a valuable resource. For example, as of February 2025, Ubisoft has been in dire straits due to a string of flops and the massive failure of Skull and Bones, a live service game that had been stuck in a notorious development hell. Their next major release is the upcoming Assassin's Creed Shadows, which has received negative feedback from early access playtesters and general audience apathy, making many people suspect it will be a commercial failure. In the midst of all this, Ubisoft has been conducting routine rounds of layoffs and studio closures to curb expenses, as has BioWare following the failure of Dragon Age Veilguard. Dragon Age is a series of RPGs, and Veilguard began development as an RPG before EA told BioWare to make it into a live service game to chase that trend. After the enormous backlash against live service and a string of commercial failures across the industry, EA told BioWare to backtrack and convert Veilguard into an RPG again, resulting in a lackluster final product and a bad RPG. As Alex explained, all these layoffs are creating a brain drain at these companies. Many of these developers are talented professionals who are following the directions of the corpos overhead, and unfortunately, it's the developers who pay the price of their mismanagement. However, the companies have shot themselves in the foot because now they've lost consumer goodwill and fired all the people who knew how to design the kinds of games that would win back their audience. However, this creates openings for other companies to take their place, such as Sucker Punch, who made the open-world stealth action samurai ninja game Ghost of Tsushima, which Alex said is a better Assassin's Creed game than anything Ubisoft could make today. Considering AC Shadows follow Ghost of Tsushima, I suspect Ubisoft was trying to ride their coattails, and the success of Blue Eye Samurai and Shogun on TV. An article from Bounding Into Comics discussed an interview given by Dan Vavra on the impact of these individual critics. Contrary to what the overall industry would like the public to believe, the criticisms leveled against both the video game industry and its current output by such large online critics as Asmongold or The Critical Drinker are having a definitive impact on multiple AAA developers. Bearing in mind the dichotomy between journalists and companies, it makes perfect sense that this is what's happening. The demographic of people who are most passionate about games and who put the most money into the industry no longer trust the mainstream media because it no longer represents or caters to their interests. In contrast, people like Angry Joe developed their following by expressing the same passions as their followers. They do represent them, and now they wield influence over the industry by influencing the consumer audience who trusts them. Dan Vavra said, "It's unsustainable how these corporations do it, considering that they've now made games that nobody wanted." And they even said it. When those gamers started complaining that they didn't like it and they didn't want that kind of game, the developers started telling them that they were stupid and that it wasn't a game for them, which is completely bizarre that you're insulting your own customers. The Critical Drinker is the online persona of author Will Jordan, who began to criticize films on YouTube while drunk, or pretending to be, I can't really say which. When he talked about this article on his gaming channel, he attributed his success and the fact that companies have taken notice as a mark of a changing media industry. After years of criticizing movies, he has recently begun making his own short films, funded by donations from his fans, which is proof enough for me that bypassing the established industry is indeed becoming possible, and in new ways. He says these companies are paper tigers, citing their massive follower bases on social media contrasted with the relatively low average view count. In his video, he shows IGN has 18.7 million subscribers on YouTube, but on average gets under 50,000 views on individual videos. As of writing, his video has 362,702 views. He asserts this is because these companies have become overly partisan, catering to trending narratives, special interest groups, and companies instead of their target audience. and lack authenticity, whereas individual, self-employed creators do what they do out of genuine passion that shows in their work, instead of being standardized to fit a brand image. I would even go as far to say it follows the broader trend of young people's growing distaste for corporations, standardization, and minimalism. People crave more depth and sincerity from what they engage with, and to feel seen as individuals instead of cogs, with their niche interests catered to, instead of consuming media made for mass appeal. And these individual creators can fulfill that need. That isn't to say that these creators are all positive, however. CoffeeZilla dedicated a significant portion of his CSGO investigation to the role of live streamers and media influencers in promoting gambling to their audiences, many of which include young kids. And like with writers for legacy media, independent creators are equally incentivized to pander to one side or the other of some debate, use clickbait, and capitalize on drama, tragedy, bandwagoning, and so on to generate their views and income, regardless of the ethics. While I respect and admire the critical drinker, it is undeniable that he tends to align with what could be considered right-wing critics. By right-wing, I don't mean promoting any right-wing policies or politicians per se. Instead, his views on media tend to reflect the values held by people who are right-wing.
100-pound teenage girls can somehow beat up 250-pound stuntmen with ease because, yeah, that's definitely believable. Just silly things like these two characters are walking through the ruins of a city in the latest episode that I saw, and there's still somehow magically pride flags and pride murals everywhere.
He has, on occasion, actually spoken directly against that crowd when he says such criticism isn't warranted. Still, he demonstrably caters to that audience in what jokes he makes and what media he chooses to mock for his audience's enjoyment.
Now, I'm no historical expert here, but I'm pretty sure that a gentleman like this would be a bit out of place in 16th century Japan, which wasn't exactly known for being a multicultural melting pot, if you catch my drift. Perhaps worst of all, the licensed character statue of the game's female supporting character perched on top of a half-Tory gate, which is a bit unfortunate because in Japan, that's an iconic symbol of the atomic bombing of Nagasaki, so needless to say, it didn't go down too well.
His audiences do love a teardown, and that is a major source of views and thus income for such creators. Angry Joe is openly left-leaning, and while he similarly tries to avoid openly discussing personal politics in his videos, his commitment to being frank about his views and tastes also includes his views on politicized games and gaming discussions, and on politics that affect the industry, such as the Trump tariffs. We are at risk of replacing the corporate-imposed echo chambers of selectively published information with one created by algorithms, so I guess a different kind of corporate-imposed, and of our own self-perpetuating biases. As much as it pains me to say this, corporations aren't all bad either, as they provide the platforms and required infrastructure for these individual influencers like Angry Joe and CoffeeZilla to publish their content. Many of the predatory and unethical creator behaviors I mentioned are the result of people trying to game the algorithm created by the corporations, though. They do this for fame, but also because it's how they gain their income, and that income allows them to make the content they do and be self-employed. Like I said, it's complicated, with both positives and negatives that neither tip the scale nor cancel each other out. As I've stated before, any and all media can be biased and misleading, but individual creators are allowed to operate based on their own ethics, for better or worse. Like the promotional streamers for CSGO casinos, CoffeeZilla could have accepted a paycheck from one casino to investigate another, but he stayed true to his integrity, declined the bribe, and investigated the whole industry. Or so he claims. I personally believe him, but I could be wrong. There's just no way of truly knowing. The critical drinker calls the online media landscape a free market of ideas. Creators can focus on making what they enjoy and covering what they enjoy, however niche, and are allowed more freedom of expression, nor do they have to focus on mass appeal because they only have themselves to support, if it's even a career for them. And because there are millions of these creators, audiences can find individuals who reflect their interests and their sensibilities.